My husband, who disappeared for a month without a word, returned only to marry a rich woman. He came back home unaware that the palace he so proudly built stood on land I had inherited. When he returned, his pride and fortune had already turned to dust. Before we begin the story, please leave a comment telling me which city or country you're from. I'm curious. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to support the channel. That morning, the air in the room felt colder than usual, but a cold sweat trickled down Alara's temples. In her arms, her 7-month-old son whimpered, struggling to breathe. His breaths were short and shallow, and the air that touched Alara's neck felt like fire. "It's okay, baby. You're going to be okay," Alara whispered, her voice a cracked, barely audible sound. Her right hand fumbled across the empty space beside her in the bed. The sheets there were as cold and stiff as her heart. It had been 2 weeks since her husband Ethan had walked out without a word. At first, she thought he was just blowing off steam after a minor argument over money for baby formula. But one day turned into 3, and 3 days became 14 days of silence. With a trembling hand, Alara picked up her phone from the nightstand. For the 100th time, she dialed Ethan's number. The result was the same. "The person you are trying to reach is unavailable." The monotonous robotic voice sounded like a mockery. The man who had promised her father he would be her protector had now vanished at the most critical moment when their child was battling a high fever. "Ethan, where are you?" she murmured faintly. Her empty eyes stared at the text message thread where a single undelivered checkmark remained next to her last plea. It was 6 a.m. Sunlight began to seep through the blinds, but it offered no warmth to Alara. She hadn't slept a wink. Her eyes were red and swollen. Just as she managed to lay the crying baby down, a rough knock echoed from outside her bedroom door. "Knock, knock, Alara, get up. Do you have any idea what time it is?" It was Chloe, Ethan's younger sister. She had been mooching off them for the past 6 months. At 22, Chloe had no intention of working, believing that since the house belonged to her brother, she was entitled to enjoy everything it offered. Alara staggered to the door and opened it. "Chloe, please be quiet. The baby just fell asleep. His fever is really high." Chloe stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, a pout on her face. Instead of asking about her nephew's well-being, she shoved a wrinkled blouse in Alara's face. "I have a brunch date with my friends at noon. When am I supposed to iron this? Do it for me right now. And can't you see the pile of dishes in the sink? I haven't even had breakfast yet." Chloe snapped without a hint of guilt. Alara took a long breath, trying to suppress the pounding headache. "Chloe, I haven't slept all night. The baby is sick, Ethan still isn't back, and I don't have a single dollar to take him to the doctor. Could you just help me for a little while? Just watch the baby, so I can take a shower and get a cool cloth for him." Chloe scoffed, looking at Alara with the same disdain she'd shown since the day she moved in, as if Alara were nothing more than a maid who had accidentally married her brother. "Oh, Alara, it's normal for babies to get fevers. They get over it. And my brother is out there working hard to provide for you two. He might be too busy to call. He's not like you just sitting at home all day. Now stop making excuses and iron this," Chloe snapped. "I don't want to be embarrassed in front of my friends because of a wrinkled shirt." Alara's heart felt like it was being sliced. "Chloe, this is my mother's land. I've taken care of this house. You are a guest here. Could you please show a shred of empathy?" At the mention of her mother's land, Chloe's face hardened. She knew the ownership of the property was her family's weak point, so she always retaliated with an emotional shield. "Oh, here we go with the property talk again. Ethan is your husband. What belongs to the wife also belongs to the husband, right? Stop being so arrogant. If my brother knew how lazy you've become, he'd want to come home even less." Chloe threw the blouse at Alara's face and stormed off to the kitchen, muttering about how unfortunate her brother was to have such a demanding wife. Alara sank to the cold kitchen floor, staring blankly at the blouse. The tears she had been holding back finally broke free. She felt utterly isolated in her own home. This house built on the land her mother had left her, which should have been her safest haven, now felt like a prison filled with people who didn't want her. She thought of her father, Frank. A man of few words, he had been against her marriage to Ethan from the start. "A man who obeys his mother without question can never be a leader for his wife," was his advice. Alara had ignored it, believing Ethan's love was enough to protect her. Now she was too ashamed to call her father and admit the old man had been right. She rummaged through her pajama pocket and pulled out her wallet. Inside were only 2 $1 bills. The household money Ethan had given her before he left was already spent on baby supplies. Alara felt like a fool. She had let Ethan manage their finances, believing his excuse that he was putting it all into a savings account for their future. Now she had no idea where that savings was. Fear began to curdle into dark suspicion. Why was Chloe so nonchalant? Why hadn't her mother-in-law Brenda ever asked why her son hadn't come home? Alara stood up, ignoring the blouse on the floor. She walked towards Ethan's study, which was always locked. She knew he kept a spare key hidden on the top of the doorframe. With trembling hands, she grabbed the key and opened the door. The room was neat. Too neat. Alara opened the small filing cabinet where Ethan kept important documents. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Ethan's passport was gone. The joint bank account statements were missing. But what made her breath catch was the bottom drawer. A small travel suitcase, the one Ethan always used for short business trips, was supposed to be there. It was gone. Alara collapsed into her husband's office chair. Ethan hadn't left for a spur-of-the-moment business trip. He had planned his departure. He had packed his bags while she was distracted, perhaps while she was busy shopping at the market. A new wave of dread washed over her. This wasn't a simple marital spat. Something much bigger, much darker was being hidden from her. Just then, the baby's cry erupted from the next room louder and sharper than before. It snapped Alara back to reality. She had to act. She couldn't just wait for a man who might never return. Wiping her tears fiercely, she went back to her room, grabbed her phone, and did what she had avoided, out of fear of greater conflict. She sent a message to the family group chat, where Brenda and all of Ethan's siblings were members. Ethan has been gone for over 2 weeks, and he's not answering his phone. The baby is very sick. If Ethan doesn't answer my call within the hour, I'm filing a missing persons report with the police and going to a lawyer with all the evidence I have regarding this property dispute. It was a risky move. She knew her actions would infuriate Brenda and make her position even more precarious. But looking at her baby shivering with fever, she realized that being an obedient wife was just a slow death at the hands of this parasitic family. 2 minutes after she sent the message, her phone vibrated. It wasn't from Ethan. It was a short text from an unknown number, but its content made her blood run cold. If you want to see your husband again, don't make trouble. Stay quiet or you lose everything. Alara stared at the screen with wide eyes. The baby's cries grew louder. The threatening message hung in the air, opening a new chapter in a nightmare that had just begun. The menacing message pulsed on Alara's phone screen, each blink, a silent eye watching the tears stream down her cheeks. Stay quiet, or you lose everything. It wasn't just a threat. It was a chain tightening around her neck. But the moment her feverish baby's tiny fingers curled around her own fear, transformed into a cold, hard fury. She would not be silenced by some nameless coward. If she remained quiet, she would lose the things that mattered most, her sanity and her child's safety. With unsteady hands, Alara bundled the baby in a thick blanket. Her head throbbed from lack of sleep, but she ignored it. She didn't wait the hour she had demanded in the group chat. She couldn't wait another second. With the last of her cash, she called a taxi to her mother-in-law's house. Brenda's home stood proudly in a manicured middle-class neighborhood, a stark contrast to Alara's inner turmoil. As she stepped out of the taxi, Alara nearly stumbled. She walked to the large wooden front door and knocked several times. When the door opened, a perfectly coiffed Brenda appeared, dressed in a silk robe and smelling of strong perfume. She looked Alara up and down with the same contemptuous gaze she'd had since Alara, a mere carpenter's daughter, first entered their family. "What do you think you're doing making a scene in the family chat?" "How embarrassing, Alara." Brenda's voice cut through the air before Alara could even say hello. "Brenda, do you know where Ethan is? Please, the baby is sick. He needs his father." "Ethan hasn't been home in 2 weeks." Alara's voice broke. She tried to step inside, but Brenda blocked the doorway firmly. "I can't blame him for not wanting to be home." "Look at the state of you," Brenda said, her ringed finger pointing at Alara's swollen face. Disheveled, messy, and always whining. A wife should be a sanctuary for her husband, not a burden. If Ethan left, it's because he was sick and tired of looking at your demanding face. The words hit Alara like a hammer. Demanding. What have I ever demanded? I just want him by my side when our child is sick. I don't even know if he's eating or where he's sleeping. Brenda snorted, her eyes glittering with triumph as she watched her daughter-in-law crumble. Ethan is a good son. He's away working day and night to pay off the family debt you racked up with that expensive hospital birth. He didn't want to tell you because he knew you'd worry. But you're just a fundamentally bad wife. Instead of praying for your husband, you threatened to call the police. Are you trying to ruin his future? Alara was speechless. Family debt. Ethan had never mentioned any debt. He had always assured her their finances were stable. But the narrative Brenda was weaving began to chip away at her resolve. Could it be true? Had Ethan left for her sake? Was she so selfish that she hadn't realized her husband's sacrifice? But why is his phone off? Why are his suitcase and passport gone? Alara asked, her voice weakening under the forced guilt. Brenda rolled her eyes. He needs to focus. He's working on a remote site with bad reception. Now go home and stop causing a scene. If you keep this up, I'll tell Ethan to divorce you myself. You're just living in his house. Don't act like you own the place. Slam. The door shut in Alara's face. She stood on the porch, numb, holding her whimpering baby. The words bad wife and ruining his future buzzed in her ears like angry bees. She felt small, helpless, and foolish. In her despair, she began to doubt her own instincts. What if Brenda was right? What if Ethan really was struggling for their sake? But as she walked across Brenda's lawn, she saw a luxury sedan pulling into the driveway of the house next door. The driver was a middle-aged woman from Brenda's church group. She rolled down her window. "Alara, dear, is that you? What are you doing here? I thought you'd be at Ethan's event in Northwood," the woman asked, with an innocent, clueless expression. Alara's heart skipped a beat. "Event? What event, ma'am?" The woman looked flustered, as if she'd just said something she shouldn't have. "Oh, well, I overheard Brenda yesterday saying something about Ethan having an opening for his new office or something. She mentioned he has a lot of important events in the city these days. Well, I must be going." The car drove off, leaving Alara in a chilling silence. An office opening. Brenda had said Ethan was suffering at a remote site to pay off debts. But the neighbor had heard of important events and a new office. These two conflicting stories reignited the embers of suspicion in Alara's mind. She didn't go home. She couldn't return to the house with the cold-hearted Chloe. She sat on a bench in a quiet neighborhood park, watching her baby who had cried himself to sleep. Then her eyes fell on a name in her contact list, Jess. Jess was her best friend who worked for a large catering company. Alara remembered ignoring a message from Jess 2 days ago, too busy nursing the baby. She opened the buried text. "Alara, you won't believe this, but I was looking at our catering schedule for this weekend and saw a reservation under Ethan's name for an event at the Grand Astoria Ballroom. Is that your Ethan? The menu order is for a wedding reception. Are you guys having a family event or something?" Alara's breath hitched. If she contacted Jess, she would be opening a Pandora's box that might destroy her life forever. If she stayed silent, she would remain the deluded bad wife. With a hand that no longer trembled, now fueled by a burgeoning rage instead of fear, Alara typed her reply. "Jess, can you send me a picture of the details of that catering reservation? Everything, including the names of the bride and groom on the order." After hitting send, Alara knew there was no turning back. She had just stopped being a victim and had decided to become a hunter of the truth, even if it meant facing the reality that her husband might have thrown her away like trash. Her phone vibrated. Jess was typing. In the silence of the park, Alara braced herself for the impact that might shatter her world. The phone screen remained lit, the typing indicator pulsing in her chat with Jess. In Alara's arms, the baby's breathing had evened out, though his skin was still warm to the touch. The evening breeze of the suburban park rustled through her messy hair, but she didn't notice. Her entire being was focused on one thing: her friend's reply. A vibration startled her. It wasn't a text, but a call. Alara impulsively swiped the green button. "Hello, Jess." Alara's voice was clogged with emotion. "Alara, where are you? Why do you sound like that? It sounds windy." Jess's voice on the other end was laced with concern. Jess had been Alara's best friend since high school, a down-to-earth woman who worked as an operations coordinator for a premier national catering company. She was well aware of the struggles Alara had faced since marrying Ethan, and had always been suspicious of his mama's boy tendencies. "I'm at a park near my house. The baby's fever went down a bit, so I brought him out for some air." Alara tried to force a small laugh. It came out as a hollow, broken sound. "About that reservation. You must have the wrong person, right, Ethan? He's working out of town right now. His mother said he's trying to earn money to pay off my hospital bills. There's no way he'd be booking catering." A long silence stretched from the other end. Alara could hear the clatter of dishes in the background of Jess's bustling workplace. "Alara, listen to me carefully." Jess's voice lowered, sounding dead serious. "I just checked a copy of the contract on my boss's desk. The name is Ethan Davis. The billing address is his old office on Grand Avenue. And this isn't just some boxed lunch order, Alara. This is a luxury wedding package for 500 guests. The deposit alone was $5,000 paid 2 weeks ago. in cash. Alara's knees went weak. She barely managed to stay seated on the edge of the worn-out park bench. $5,000, Jess, he told me. We had to be frugal. He didn't leave me a single dollar when he left 2 weeks ago. Our electricity just got shut off, Jess. That's what I thought was so strange, Alara. The bride's name here is listed as Clara Richmond. Do you know her? Her family ordered the most expensive menu package. Salmon steak, prime rib. Everything is top tier. The main event is next weekend at the Grand Astoria Ballroom, Jess explained, her tone laced with indignation. Alara, if Ethan told you he had no money, he was lying through his teeth. $5,000 isn't a small amount. Alara shook her head, though Jess couldn't see her. Her mind went blank. A part of her tried to defend Ethan. Maybe it's another Ethan Davis. The name is pretty common, but the detail about his old office address couldn't be a coincidence. Ethan had just quit that job a month ago, saying he wanted to start his own business. Jess, please. Send me a picture of that contract, Alara whispered. I'll try to sneak a photo when I can, Alara. But you need to brace yourself. If this really is Ethan, it means he was planning all of this while I was at home changing diapers. The call ended. Alara stared at the sky, which was beginning to turn a bruised orange. All the signs she had ignored began to resurface in her memory, like painful puzzle pieces. Ethan suddenly changing his phone password. Ethan coming home late, blaming long hours at work even when there were no major projects. And most painfully, Ethan letting her cry alone as hospital bills piled up, using the excuse that our savings aren't enough yet. With heavy steps, Alara walked home. The baby was fast asleep, unaware that his world was on the brink of collapse. As she entered her yard, a sight made her stomach clench. Her sister-in-law, Chloe, was sitting on the front porch, greedily eating a cake from an expensive department store bakery. Next to her were several shopping bags from high-end brands at the local mall. Oh, you're finally back, Alara. Must be nice to take a leisurely afternoon stroll while the house is a mess, Chloe sneered, without looking up, her eyes still glued to her phone. Alara stopped in front of Chloe, her gaze fixed on the shopping bags. Chloe, where did you get the money for all that? The power in this house is off. My son is sick, and you're out buying luxury goods. Chloe looked up, her expression a mixture of annoyance and condescension. Seriously, Alara, this is my money. Ethan gave it to me as an allowance before he left. My brother actually cares about his sister, you know. Not like some wife who just complains and gives him a headache. Ethan gave you an allowance but didn't leave money for his own son's formula. Alara's voice started to rise, trembling with the emotions caught in her throat. Chloe stood up, brushing cake crumbs off her skirt. Listen here, Alara. My brother is dealing with the debt you created. So what if he gave me a little something? Ethan is tired of taking care of a wife who contributes nothing. You should be taking better care of him. And make sure his crying doesn't wake me up tonight. Chloe deliberately bumped Alara's shoulder as she swaggered into the house. Alara stood frozen on the porch. She looked at the cake box Chloe had left behind. It had a sticker from Nordstrom. It was a long drive from their house, and the price of that cake was equivalent to 3 days of her grocery budget. The suspicion was no longer a creeping vine. It was a vice gripping her heart. There was a common thread between Brenda's story, Chloe's attitude, and Jess's information. They were all playing roles in a grand play, and Alara was the only one who hadn't been given a script. She entered the dark, powerless house. After laying the baby in his crib, she walked to a corner of the room where a small table held some of Ethan's old belongings. There was an old tablet with a cracked screen, one he rarely used after getting a new phone. Alara tried to turn it on. The battery was low, but there was about 5% left. She remembered that Ethan had synced his cloud account to this tablet. With trembling hands, she tried to open the automatically synced photo folder. The screen flickered, the tablet loading slowly. Alara held her breath. If Ethan had truly betrayed her, the proof would be here. A moment later, a folder named New Life Project appeared. Alara opened it. Inside were not work documents but photos of Ethan with a beautiful woman, the woman who must be Clara Richmond. They were in what looked like a wedding dress shop. Ethan was trying on a black tuxedo, smiling with a radiance he hadn't shown Alara in over a year. Alara's tears fell onto the cracked tablet screen. The pain was sharper than anything she had ever felt. Ethan wasn't suffering at some remote site. He was celebrating his new life. Suddenly, the battery died and the tablet went dark. In the complete blackness of the house, Alara could only hear the sound of her own frantic heartbeat. She realized one thing. She could wait no longer. Alara grabbed a small bag. She took out the deed to the land her mother had owned, which she had hidden under a pile of clothes. A small, dangerous resolve began to form in her mind. If Ethan thought he could use this house and this land as collateral for his new life, he was gravely mistaken. You chose to build your palace on your son's pain, Ethan Alara whispered into the darkness. So don't blame me when I tear your world down before you even get to enjoy it. She decided to go to Ethan's old office building the next morning to find out who exactly Clara Richmond was. Even though she knew it would provoke Brenda's wrath, Alara was no longer afraid of losing Ethan. She was now more afraid of losing herself if she continued to stay silent. The darkness that had enveloped the house last night wasn't just from the power outage. It was the beginning of the end, the extinguishing of the last embers of hope in Alara's heart. The morning greeted her with an eerie silence. The hum of the refrigerator that usually filled the kitchen was gone, replaced by the faint, sour smell of meat and milk beginning to spoil in the warming appliance. Alara sat on a kitchen chair, her eyes vacant. In her lap, the baby began to fuss. He was hungry, but the stress of the past few days had caused her milk to dry up. She tried the faucet, but only a coughing sound came from the dry pipes. The water pump wouldn't work without electricity. She picked up her phone, which had only 3% battery left. With trembling fingers, she typed a message to Ethan. Ethan, please just turn the power back on. Don't you feel sorry for our son? He's so hot and there's no water. I literally don't have a single dollar. Please come back. Alara held her breath, staring at the screen. 1 second, 2 seconds. The delivered status next to the message changed to read. Ethan had seen it. Alara's heart pounded. She waited for a reply, an apology, or at least a notification that the electric bill had been paid. But minutes turned into an hour and no reply came. Ethan remained silent. He had seen her plea from the darkness and had done nothing. That silence was more painful than all of Brenda's insults the day before. Reading it and not responding, that was Ethan's way of telling her that she and their son were no longer his priority, just obstacles he wanted to erase from his life. The silence was broken around 10 a.m. when a small moving truck stopped in front of the gate. Alara thought it was Ethan. She ran to the door, her eyes shining with hope, but she stopped dead in her tracks. It wasn't Ethan who got out. 2 men in black t-shirts walked straight into the house as if they owned the place. Behind them strolled Chloe, sunglasses perched on her head. Her vibrant, energetic demeanor was a stark contrast to Alara's living corpse-like state. Chloe, what is this? Who are these people? Alara asked, bewildered. Chloe didn't answer. She walked straight into the living room and pointed to the large flat-screen TV, the sound system, and Ethan's collection of luxury watches displayed in a glass cabinet. Take all of that. Be careful with it. No scratches, Chloe commanded the 2 men. Alara blocked their path. Wait, these are Ethan's things. You can't just take them. Chloe took off her sunglasses and fixed Alara with a cold, sharp glare. We're taking them because they're Ethan's things, Alara. He told me to. He said this house isn't being maintained and is dark and damp, so it's better to move his expensive belongings to Mom's house before they get ruined. Move them, Ethan. You spoke with him. A heavy tightness gripped her chest. He talks to you, but won't answer my messages. He knows the power is out, he knows his son needs help, and he tells you to take these things. Chloe scoffed. She started packing Ethan's designer clothes from a guest room closet into a large suitcase. Ethan is disappointed in you, Alara. He said you create too much drama, and I'm moving out today too. I'm tired of living in a house without electricity. You can handle it yourself. You're the one who knows all about the land and property here anyway. Alara tried to grab the suitcase, but her strength was gone. She would have collapsed if she hadn't held onto the edge of the sofa. Chloe, please don't leave me alone like this. At least leave some money for your nephew's formula. Chloe pulled a $5 bill from her purse and tossed it on the table. Buy a candle with this. And stop expecting so much from a man you drove away. I'm leaving now, Alara. Oh, and don't try to contact me or Mom again. Ethan wants peace and quiet to focus on his new project. Chloe followed the 2 men carrying Ethan's valuables out the door. The house instantly felt empty, hollow, and alien. Alara stood in the middle of the now barren living room. Only the heavy furniture difficult to move remained. The profound confusion began to morph into a bitter realization. Ethan wasn't working out of town. He was liquidating his assets, both emotional and material. He was erasing every trace of his existence from this house, leaving Alara in a structure on the verge of financial collapse. Alara stared at the $5 bill on the table. It was the final insult she could bear. Her mind flashed back to her conversation with Jess the night before. A new life project luxury catering the name Clara Richmond. It all made sense now. Ethan wasn't emptying the house to keep his things safe. He was severing his last ties to his past, to Alara and their baby. Alara went to her room and took out the brown envelope containing the deed her father had given her. She looked around. This house was built with Ethan's money. That was true. But the land was her mother's, a legacy that was supposed to be her final shield. Ethan might have thought he'd won the war by taking the TV, the watches, and the clothes. He had forgotten that the very ground he stood on was still in Alara's hands. "You want to leave without a trace, Ethan. You want to move on to your luxurious new life," Alara whispered. Her voice was now low and trembling with a newfound resolve. Alara made a small, very dangerous decision. She would no longer send begging messages to Ethan. She picked up her phone and found the contact for Leo, a man who had shown interest in her in the past, and was now a successful contractor in construction and land development. Leo was a man Ethan had always been jealous of because of his solid family background. Alara knew that contacting Leo might create new problems with Brenda and invite condemnation from Ethan's family. But in this dark, empty house, she realized she didn't need a cowardly husband. She needed power to right all these wrongs. "Leo, it's Alara. I need your professional help. I have a building on my property that I want legally and completely cleared. Can we meet?" The message was sent just before her phone battery died completely. In the darkness, Alara hugged her baby tightly. She knew that starting tomorrow, she would no longer be a waiting wife but a landowner who would reclaim her rights down to the very roots. That morning, the air on the porch of Mrs. Gable, the friendly neighborhood busybody, was thick with the humidity of last night's rain. Alara sat hunched over in a plastic chair, her phone plugged into an outlet on the porch wall. With her power completely out since yesterday, she had to rely on a neighbor's kindness to get a charge. Beside her, her baby slept in an old, faded stroller. Alara felt like a fraud. Just yesterday, she was a wife who felt she had everything. Today, she had to beg for electricity to turn on her phone. The dizziness in her head hadn't subsided, and a gnawing hunger began to twist her stomach as she'd only had one meal in the last 24 hours to save money for formula. As soon as the phone screen lit up, a series of vibrations filled her hand. Hundreds of messages, notifications from the family group chat, and missed calls from Jess poured in. But a dark intuition guided her fingers to open her social media app and go straight to the Status Updates tab. There, a green circle glowed next to Brenda's profile. Alara held her breath, her heart pounding so hard she could feel the ache in her fingertips. She tapped the screen. The first photo appeared an extravagant display of white flowers against a beautifully carved traditional wooden backdrop. The second photo was a plate of the gourmet food Jess had described over the phone. And the third photo was the one that sucked all the oxygen out of Alara's world. It showed a pair of hands exchanging wedding vows. The man's hand was one she knew intimately. There was a small scar on the back of his right hand from a splash of hot oil when he was helping her cook a year ago. That hand was now firmly grasping the hand of another woman. Beside it, a woman's hand adorned with intricate white henna tattoos and a sparkling diamond ring rested delicately. Beneath the photo, Brenda had written a caption in bold, celebratory letters. "Thank you, God, the wedding is finally official. Congratulations, my son. May this be the beginning of your true happiness. I am so proud of you, Ethan." Alara's world didn't crumble slowly. It imploded in an instant, like a building detonated from within. Her vision blurred, and a loud ringing in her ears made even the sound of her suddenly awakened baby's cries seem distant. Alara whispered, her voice like sandpaper on dry wood. "So that's why the suitcase was gone. That's why he took the passport. That's why he had cut off their electricity and let his son suffer through a fever without a care." Ethan wasn't struggling to pay off family debts. He was in the next city over, celebrating a new life with another woman at the very same moment his wife was struggling for a sip of clean water. The pain that washed over her this time was different. If yesterday was confusion and fear, all that remained now was a raw, cold emptiness. She felt like discarded trash, used and thrown away. Ethan and his mother had planned this meticulously, waiting for her to let her guard down before casting her into the darkness. "Alara, dear, what's wrong? You look so pale." Mrs. Gable's voice brought her back to reality. Alara didn't answer. She yanked the charging cable out and, ignoring her neighbor's surprised look, pushed the stroller quickly away. She practically ran back to her silent house. Once inside the dark home, Alara collapsed onto the living room floor. She looked at the walls of the house Ethan had built with such pride. This house, which Ethan always boasted, was a testament to his success, was built on a foundation of lies. And more painfully, he had built it on her mother's land. Alara picked up her phone. A burning rage began to evaporate her tears. She found the number for her father, Frank. "Hello, Dad." Alara's voice was shaky, but there was a hard edge to it. "Alara, what is it you sound out of breath?" Her father's calm voice came from the other end. "Dad, the original deed to this house. You still have it right." There was a brief silence. Frank was a very cautious man. "I do, Alara." "Why? What has Ethan done now? I heard from a neighbor your power was cut." "He got remarried today, Dad. In front of Brenda. They all deceived me. They left your grandson and me to starve here while they threw a party," Alara said in broken sentences, each word like pulling a thorn from her throat. "I don't want this house anymore, Dad. I want my mother's land back." "Alara, calm down. Don't be rash. If you want a divorce, we can handle it properly," her father advised. "No, Dad. There's no properly for people who let their own child suffer for their pleasure. They're planning to move in here after the party, Dad," Chloe told me yesterday. "He's going to bring his new wife here," Alara shouted, her voice echoing in the empty room. "I will never let that woman set foot on my mother's land." Without waiting for her father's reply, Alara hung up. She knew what she had to do now. For too long, she had been too soft, too trusting in the idea of being an obedient wife. Brenda was right. She was a bad wife for letting herself be trampled on like this. She opened a message from Leo, the contractor and old friend she had contacted last night. "Alara, I got your message. I can help you clear that land. But are you sure? That building is still in good condition. It's worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. If you tear it down, you'll be left with nothing but an empty lot." With fingers that were no longer trembling but steady, Alara typed her reply. "I don't need the building, Leo. I don't want to breathe under a roof built with a traitor's money. Come here tomorrow morning. Take a look at the site. I want this house flattened before they get back from their honeymoon." A new sense of pressure emerged. Alara knew her decision to demolish the house would trigger an open war with Ethan's family. She would be accused of being crazy evil, of destroying her husband's assets. But as she looked at Ethan's wedding photo on her phone one more time, she knew the only way to heal the wound was to destroy the source of the pain at its very root. The heat rising from the asphalt roads of the neighboring city seemed to burn the soles of Alara's feet, but it was nothing compared to the fire blazing in her chest. After a 2-hour ride on a stuffy intercity bus, she now stood in front of the Grand Astoria Ballroom. It was a magnificent venue, with towering white columns adorned with fresh jasmine and white rose wreaths. The sweet floral scent wafted out to the sidewalk, but to Alara it smelled like the rotting corpse of honesty. In her arms, the baby began to stir, whimpering at the sound of car horns as luxury vehicles lined up to enter the parking lot. Alara adjusted the baby with a trembling hand. She was wearing the best dress she owned, one she had bought with Ethan 2 years ago for a holiday. But here she felt like a dirty stain on a clean white canvas. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the noise. "We're just here to ask Daddy a question." Alara walked towards the main entrance. But as her foot touched the red carpet of the lobby, 2 burly men in black suits with earpieces blocked her path. One of them, a man with a stern jawline who served as the head of security for the bride. Clara's family eyed Alara with a menacing look. His mission was to ensure no disturbances at the union of 2 prominent families. "Excuse me, ma'am. Do you have an invitation?" he asked in a cold tone that left no room for negotiation. I'm Ethan Davis's wife." Alara's voice trembled. She tried to hold her head high to show what little pride she had left. "I just want to talk to my husband for a moment." The head of security and his colleague exchanged a look. A thin, cruel smirk appeared on their lips. "Ma'am, I believe you have the wrong address. The groom inside is Mr. Ethan Davis, son of Mrs. Brenda Davis, and his only wife is the lovely Miss Clara Richmond, who he has just officially wed. Please do not cause a disturbance here." "It's not a lie. This child is the proof," Alara cried out, attracting the attention of several guests who had just stepped out of a limousine. Startled by his mother's shout, the baby began to wail loudly. His cries pierced through the soft, traditional music flowing from inside the building. "Ma'am, I am asking you politely. Please leave this place now or we will be forced to use physical means," the head of security threatened. He stepped forward, closing the space between them, and forcing Alara to take a few steps back. Just then, the large glass doors of the building opened as several staff members came out to greet VIP guests. Through the gap, Alara saw him. Ethan was there, standing on a high, ornate wedding dais. He was dressed in a very expensive light gray tuxedo. He looked dashing, a completely different person from the Ethan in worn-out shirts who used to come home from work. Their eyes met. Alara felt her heart stop. For 3 seconds, that felt like an eternity. Ethan looked at Alara. He saw his crying child. He saw his wife, a mess of sweat and tears. A flicker of surprise crossed Ethan's eyes, but it was fleeting. Alara opened her mouth to call his name, hoping for a shred of conscience. "Ethan, it's me, your wife. That's your son, he's sick." But Ethan did something more painful than any slap. He took a long breath and deliberately turned his head towards his new wife, the beautiful and elegant-looking Clara. He smiled at her and whispered something that made her laugh softly. It was as if Alara was nothing more than a pile of garbage that had accidentally passed by. Ethan gave a small hand signal to the building security and then stepped back inside the dais, hidden by the decorations. "Mr. Davis says he does not know you." "Now let's go," the security guard said, grabbing Alara's arm roughly. "Let go of me, I can walk on my own," Alara resisted, but the guard's grip was far stronger. She was dragged out of the lobby and pushed onto the sidewalk. Several guests stared at her with disgust, as if she were a beggar trying to ruin a high-society party. Alara fell onto the rough pavement. The baby cried hysterically from the shock. She hugged him tightly, letting her tears wet his tiny cheeks. An overwhelming sense of shame crushed her. She felt so miserable, so degraded. Ethan had not only betrayed her, he had publicly discarded her identity as his wife. His dismissal was the final answer. There was no more room for discussion, no more explanations about the family debt Brenda had fabricated. Ethan had chosen his world, and that world did not include Alara or their child. Alara stood up on still shaky legs. She gave the grand building one last look. Inside, they were laughing at her pain. They were planning to return to her house after this party, the house on her mother's land. "You think you can bring that woman into my house, Ethan," Alara whispered. Her voice was now cold and monotonous. The grief had evaporated, replaced by a frightening resolve. Alara rummaged through her bag and pulled out her nearly dead phone. She didn't call Ethan. She called Leo. "Leo, it's me. How long did you say it would take to flatten that building?" "A few hours once the equipment is on site, Alara." "But are you serious? That's a huge asset." Leo's voice sounded hesitant on the other end. "Do it now. Bring the equipment tomorrow morning. I'll give you written permission as the landowner. I don't want them to find a single wall standing when they get back from here." Alara's eyes glinted sharply. The decision was incredibly risky. Legally, she could be sued for destroying her husband's property. But mentally, Alara knew that leaving the house intact was letting Ethan win. She would rather go to jail than watch Ethan and his new wife sleep under a roof she had nurtured with her own sweat and tears. That night, Alara didn't go home to cry. She went home to clear out the last of her memories before the bulldozer arrived. Alara's steps felt as heavy as lead as she walked the familiar path to her childhood home. The smell of damp earth and the fragrance of the plumeria tree by the old wooden gate greeted her stirring memories of a time when her life was as simple as chasing kites instead of being haunted by the bitter reality of betrayal. In her arms, the baby, exhausted from crying, was sound asleep, but his breathing was still ragged, a lingering trace of his fever. "Dad," Alara said in a barely audible voice as she knocked on the solid wood door. The door opened to reveal a middle-aged man in a plain t-shirt and work pants. Frank, Alara's father, stood frozen. His normally calm eyes now glinted with deep concern at the state of his only daughter. Alara's face was gaunt, her clothes were wrinkled with sweat and tears, and her eyes were red and swollen. Without needing many words, Frank stepped aside, making way for his daughter to enter the truest embrace of protection. Alara collapsed onto the living room sofa, covered with a hand-knitted blanket her late mother had made. There, under the dim yellow light, her sobs broke free once more. She told him everything: Ethan's disappearance, the luxury catering Jess had discovered, and the climax, the scene at the Grand Astoria ballroom, the moment Ethan had turned away from her as if she were a repulsive stranger. "He got remarried, Dad, right in front of my eyes. And he just watched as the guards dragged me out like a thief." Alara choked out, her voice muffled against her father's shoulder. "That house. I gave my entire life to care for it. I scrimped on groceries so he could make the installment payments for the building materials. And now he wants to bring her there." Frank remained silent for a long time. His hands, calloused from years of carpentry, rhythmically patted Alara's back in a comforting gesture. There were no curses or angry outbursts against his ungrateful son-in-law. Frank was Alara's anchor, the one who had always taught her that boiling rage only burns the person who holds it. "First, get some rest, Alara. Feed the baby. I have something to give you, Frank said quietly. After Alara had calmed down a bit and put the baby to sleep in her old room, Frank brought out a dusty, old brown envelope tied with a worn string. He placed it on the wooden kitchen table, the same table where Alara had learned to cook with her mother. All this time, I kept quiet because I thought Ethan was a man who knew gratitude. I thought if I gave you two a place to live, he would take good care of you. And my grandson, Frank, began slowly opening the envelope. Alara looked at the documents inside, confused. She saw a green-tinted paper with an official seal. This is the deed to the house, Dad. Not just the house, Alara. This is the official title, the deed of ownership for the land, Frank said, pointing to the name written on it. The property in the Maple Creek subdivision doesn't belong to Ethan. It was your late grandmother's inheritance, and the title was transferred into your name 5 years ago, long before you even met Ethan. Alara's eyes widened. All this time, Ethan had acted as if he were the hero who had provided them with a roof over their heads. He boasted about every penny he spent building the walls and the roof. Out of love, Alara had never questioned the ownership of the land. She just knew it as their home. Your mother's dying wish was that I not tell Ethan about this until the time was right. She said you needed to have a hill to stand on when the storm eventually came. And from the looks of it, that storm is now at your doorstep, Frank continued, his eyes fixed on Alara. It's true that Ethan built the structure on it with his money, but the ground he stands on is entirely yours. Legally, he is nothing more than a tenant on your land. The realization hit Alara like a tidal wave. The feeling of powerlessness that had plagued her since yesterday suddenly vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp new strength. All this time she had felt trapped because she thought Ethan was the sole owner of the house. She was afraid of being kicked out of losing her son's home. But it turned out she was the rightful owner all along. So, Ethan and Brenda have no right to kick me out, Alara asked, her voice starting to find its stability. Legally, they don't have a single claim to that land. If they want to own that building, they'd have to move it off your property. And we both know that's impossible, Frank said with a faint, meaningful smile. Alara touched the cold, firm surface of the deed. In her mind, the image of Ethan smiling on the wedding dais reappeared. But this time, it was no longer accompanied by paralyzing pain. She remembered Brenda's threat to have her evicted. She remembered Chloe looting the valuables as if the house belonged to her ancestors. Alara's insides churned. She was torn between a desire for revenge and a wish to end everything quietly. But when she remembered her baby's pale face feverish, while his father threw a party, her decision was made. Dad, I'm going back to that house tomorrow, Alara said quietly but firmly. What for, child? To confront them again? Frank looked worried. Not as a begging wife. I'm going back as the landowner. I want to see their faces when they realize the palace they were so proud of stands on ground I can take away at any moment. Alara closed the envelope decisively. A new pressure mounted. Alara knew that by bringing the deed she was declaring a legal and open war. She was no longer facing a simple domestic dispute, but stepping into a property battle that could escalate to violence or jail time if she wasn't careful. Her dangerous decision was to return to the house alone, armed with nothing but a piece of paper, and wait for Ethan to bring his new wife home. Alara turned off the kitchen light. The darkness of the night no longer frightened her, because now she held the key to demolishing Ethan's entire world, a world built on lies. That morning, sunlight streamed through the window of Alara's old room, illuminating dust motes dancing over the brown envelope containing the deed. Alara woke not to an alarm but to a persistent ache in the pit of her stomach. Every time she looked at that document, a mix of gratitude and simmering rage welled up inside her. All this time, she had been standing on her own power without even knowing it, while she had spent years bowing her head under the shadow of her husband's pride. Her freshly charged phone vibrated on the nightstand. The name mother-in-law flashed on the screen. Alara stared at it for a few seconds, steadying her breath so her voice wouldn't tremble. She pressed the green button and brought it to her ear without a greeting. Alara, good you, answered. Brenda's voice was clipped and sharp. It was cheerful, like someone who had just won the lottery, yet commanding. I don't have time for a long chat. Ethan and Clara's event is over, and they'll be back soon. I want you to clear your pathetic belongings out of that house immediately. Alara closed her eyes. Her fingers gripped the edge of the bed. You just watched your son get remarried while he's still legally married, and the first thing you do is call to evict me. Brenda scoffed, her disdainful laugh sharp and cutting. Stop with the delusions of being a wife, Alara. The moment Ethan walked out that door, you were finished. Clara is the daughter of a tycoon. She's used to a clean, luxurious life. She won't set foot in a house that still has your smell in it. Besides, Ethan told me he built that house with his money, so you don't have a single right to it. He's bringing a truck tomorrow afternoon to move your remaining junk to storage, assuming you haven't moved out already. Do you know what you're saying? Ethan left his own son to starve without power for 2 weeks, and now you're going to take the house as if it's entirely his, Alara asked, in a very low voice, suppressing her rage. Of course it's his. Who paid the contractors, Ethan? Who bought the cement, Ethan? You just lived there and had a baby, Brenda snapped harshly. Enough questions. Clear out by tomorrow morning. Give the house keys to Chloe. And be careful not to break anything. Clara will sue you if you do. Got it. The call was disconnected. Alara threw the phone onto the bed. Brenda's words, "You just lived there and had a baby," were seared into her mind. But behind the pain, a bitter realization began to connect the pieces of logic she had missed. She walked to a large mirror in the corner of the room and looked at her reflection. She saw a woman who looked fragile but whose eyes were different. She was beginning to understand a truth far more disgusting than the affair itself. Ethan had been using her. For the past year, he had been very eager to build an extension at the back of the house, while always delaying payments for the roof or minor repairs. He always stressed, "This house is our future." So Alara had willingly used her own personal savings to pay for utilities and living expenses, so Ethan could focus on the asset. He had left her to live there for a month without contact, not just because he was a coward, but because he needed someone to guard the house to make sure it didn't look empty or dilapidated until he was ready to bring his wealthy new wife. "I was just a free property manager to you, wasn't I, Ethan?" Alara whispered to her reflection. "You let me suffer in the dark while you enjoyed your party. And now you think you can kick me off my own mother's land?" Alara's trampled self-respect seemed to rise up. She was no longer the woman who cried and begged for her husband to come back. She realized she held the key to his destruction, something he couldn't even imagine. Ethan might feel he owned the walls, the roof, the floors of that house. But he had forgotten that without the land beneath it, the building was nothing more than an illegal pile of materials. Alara left the room and found Frank in the living room holding his grandson. He looked at her with questioning eyes. "Dad, I'm going to that house now," Alara said firmly. "Alara, did your mother-in-law call again?" Frank looked worried. "He's bringing his new bride there tomorrow afternoon and told me to move out." "They think they can just throw me out," Alara said, grabbing her bag and putting the envelope with the deed inside. "I'm not clearing out of that house, Dad. I'm going to clear Ethan's life out of it." "Be careful, daughter. Ethan can get rough and bring people when he feels his possessions are threatened," Frank warned. "I don't care, Dad. He had the courage to trample on me because I was afraid of losing him. Now I have nothing to lose. I'm going back to that house lighting a candle and waiting for them to arrive in all their arrogance. I want to see Brenda's face when she finds out the daughter-in-law she chose can never live on this land." Alara kissed her son's forehead and walked out with a frightening resolve. She had decided to return alone to that dark, powerless house. It was a very dangerous decision. Ethan was a man with a temper when his pride was hurt, and Brenda had significant influence to pressure her mentally. But Alara knew that if she ran now, she would live the rest of her life as a defeated woman kicked out of her own home. That night, Alara sat in the pitch-black living room of the house. She had lit a single small candle on the table. In front of it, the property deed lay proudly. She waited for morning for the moment her reclaimed pride would clash with her husband's family's greed. A new pressure mounted. Every tick of the wall clock sounded like a countdown to an explosion of conflict that could destroy everything. But Alara had no intention of backing down one step. Dawn broke in a somber, ashen gray, as if the sky itself felt Alara's frozen heart. At the entrance of the house that now felt alien, Alara stood watching the slightly rusted iron gate. She hadn't slept a wink. The candle in the living room had burned down, leaving a melted lump on the wooden table like her emotions exhausted by Ethan's betrayal and Brenda's cruelty. Without waiting for the sun to fully rise, Alara stepped outside, holding her still sleeping son. She didn't carry much luggage, just a small bag of diapers and the brown envelope pressed tightly against her chest. That envelope was her lifeline now. Her destination was a single place, a contractor's office on the outskirts of the city, lined with excavators and heavy trucks. Leo was reviewing a stack of papers when Alara appeared at his door. For a moment, he was speechless. He was Alara's friend from school, a heavy equipment contractor, who had had a crush on her before Ethan came along with his sweet promises. Leo knew Ethan well. He had been a witness to Ethan's arrogance when he first laid the foundation of the house, frequently boasting about his self-made success in front of old friends, never once mentioning that the land was his wife's family. Inheritance. Alara, what's going on? Leo immediately stood up and pulled a chair for her. His sharp eyes caught his old friend's pale complexion and empty gaze. with the baby this early in the morning. Alara didn't answer with words. She placed the brown envelope on Leo's dusty office desk. I need your professional help, Leo. Not as a friend, but as a contractor. Leo frowned and opened the envelope. He was stunned to see the legal title, the deed of ownership in Alara's name. He read the fine print meticulously, then looked up at Alara with questioning eyes. Ethan got remarried yesterday, Leo. In front of his mother. In front of everyone. He left me and my son without power or money, and now wants to kick me out to bring his new wife to that house. Alara's voice was flat, almost emotionless, which sent a chill down Leo's spine. Leo leaned back in his chair. So, you're going to sue them legally. I can find you a lawyer. With this evidence, you can evict them through the courts. But it will take time, Alara. Months, maybe even a year. I don't have a year, Leo. I don't even have another minute to watch them breathe under a roof that stands on my mother's land, Alara cut in sharply. Her eyes were fixed on the yellow bulldozers parked in the yard. I want that house level with the ground. Tomorrow. A momentary silence filled the room. Leo took a long breath, trying to process the frantic words he had just heard. As a contractor, he knew the legal ramifications. The land was Alara's, but the building was constructed with Ethan's money. Demolishing it without a court order was an extreme act that could send Alara to jail for destruction of property. Alara, listen. Legally, that building is an asset. Even if it's on your land, it has a separate ownership title. If you tear it down now, Ethan can report you to the police. Leo tried to be the voice of reason, but he saw the unwavering light in Alara's eyes. An asset, Alara laughed hollowly. It was a painful sound. He built those walls with the money he should have spent on his son's formula, Leo. He made me pinch every penny for 2 years so he could build for the future. Turns out that future wasn't for me. It was for the rich woman he married yesterday. Alara leaned forward, fixing him with an intensity he couldn't look away from. I don't need the building. I don't need damages. I want him to feel what it's like to lose everything in an instant. The same way I felt when I saw his mother's social media post yesterday. You're my friend, Leo. You know how Ethan always looked down on me because I was just a carpenter's daughter. I want to show him that a carpenter can build but a landowner can destroy. Leo was silent. He was torn. On one hand, he wanted to protect Alara from the pitfalls of the law. On the other, he was fed up with Ethan, who had always been known for his cunning nature. Leo remembered clearly how Ethan had mocked him when Alara chose Ethan over him, saying, Alara needed a successful man who could build her a palace, not a rough contractor like him. Are you sure, Alara? The moment my heavy machinery touches those walls, there's no going back. You'll be facing their entire family, the police, and maybe even public condemnation, Leo asked for confirmation. I've already lost everything, Leo. My dignity was trampled in front of the Grand Astoria ballroom yesterday. Jail is nothing compared to having to watch my husband sleep with another woman on my mother's land, Alara replied firmly. Leo finally nodded slowly. He took out a work order form. All right, I'll prepare an excavator and a crew, but you have to sign a statement of absolute liability. If any legal issues arise later, you as the landowner, who gave the order, will have to bear the consequences. Alara took the pen and signed without a moment's hesitation. Her fingers were steady, no longer trembling with fear. When are they scheduled to arrive at the house? Leo asked, organizing the papers. Chloe said they'll arrive tomorrow afternoon after a short honeymoon in the next city over. I want the only thing they see when they get out of their car to be a pile of rubble, Alara said. Leo looked at Alara with a mix of pity and awe. I'll start moving the equipment tonight, Alara. We'll do it quietly so no one can call the police before it's all flattened. But you know, after this, your life will never be the same. Alara stood up, her back straight, holding her baby. My life was already ruined 2 weeks ago, Leo. Now it's their turn to feel the same destruction. Alara left Leo's office. A new weight settled in her mind. She had just signed a document that could send her behind bars. She was gambling her freedom for the most extreme form of revenge. But as she kissed her son's forehead, a kind of cold calm washed over her soul. She no longer cared about the consequences. Because for her, true justice wasn't always found in a courtroom, but sometimes it was found in the steel tracks of a bulldozer, ready to demolish Ethan's lies. That night, the sky over the Maple Creek subdivision was as dark as spilled black ink without a single star. Alara stood in the middle of the dark living room. The only light came from the streetlights filtering through the curtainless windows. The thrill of her decision at Leo's office still lingered in her chest, but now it was mixed with a suffocating tightness. Every corner of this house held a ghost of the past, a faint crayon mark on the wall near the kitchen, the lingering scent of Ethan's cologne on a pillow, a baby's keychain that jingled with every gust of wind. "I'm behind the house." "We don't have much time," a whisper came from the kitchen. Jess appeared panting, wearing a dark jacket and a hat that obscured her face. Her friend had just finished her night shift at the catering company, but without a single complaint, she had driven a borrowed pickup truck straight to Alara's house. Jess was the only other person who knew that in a few hours, this building would be history. "Thank you, Jess." "I'm so sorry to trouble you like this," Alara said quietly. "Don't apologize. I'd rather help you move your stuff than watch you rot here waiting for them to show up," Jess replied firmly. Her eyes scanned the dark room. "The power's still out." "Good. The neighbors won't suspect any movement inside." Alara moved quickly but carefully. She didn't touch a single one of Ethan's belongings. The flat-screen TV he had bought remained in its place. The plush sofa purchased on his installment plan stayed where it was. Her focus was on one thing only: memories of herself and her son. One by one, Alara packed baby clothes, bottles, and toys into boxes. She moved her wedding album not to preserve sweet memories but to prevent the photos from being crushed by the bulldozer. She wanted to burn them herself later in a ritual of liberation. While clearing out the master bedroom closet, her fingers touched a small wooden box. Inside was a simple gold necklace, a wedding gift from Ethan. Alara paused for a moment. She once considered this necklace a symbol of their sacred bond. Now the metal felt cold and repulsive, like the chains that had bound her to his lies. Without hesitation, she put the box in her small bag. It was no longer a memento. It was her living fund for her and her son after all this was over. "Alara, look at this!" Jess suddenly pointed towards the brightly lit front porch light. Alara was startled. It was definitely off this afternoon. I saw it as I was driving up. It looks like the electric bill was paid remotely." "Ethan or his mom must have paid it through their phone app," Jess whispered. "They probably turned on the outside light on purpose to show everyone the house is back to normal, ready for the new bride tomorrow." Alara stared at the light with sharp eyes. An idea sparked in her mind. "It doesn't matter, Jess. Let's just leave it on. Let the neighbors and maybe Chloe, if she drives by, think I'm still inside, crying in a corner, waiting for my husband to come back. That light is our best camouflage." They continued to work in silence. In essence, it was a process of emptying her soul. With every item moved into the pickup truck, it felt like a weight being lifted from Alara's shoulders. But her internal conflict raged on. She felt like a thief in her own house, a painful irony considering the land was legally hers. Fear crept in. What if Ethan showed up suddenly tonight? What if the plan leaked? "That's everything," Alara Jess said after several trips back and forth. "Is there anything else?" "Just one more thing." Alara walked to a corner of the dining room. She picked up a potted snake plant that she and her mother had planted together before she passed away. The plant was withered from 2 weeks of neglect, but its roots were still strong. "This can't be broken." As they prepared to close the back door, Alara went back to the front. She looked at the brightly shining porch light one more time. From the outside, the house looked peaceful and warm, a false image of a happy home. Alara took out a piece of paper, wrote a short message, and placed it on the living room table right under the burnt-out candle. "I hope this light is bright enough to guide you on your way back to the ruins, Ethan." Alara closed and locked the door. She handed the key to Jess to hold for now. Her steps towards the pickup truck were light, but her heart was pounding like a war drum. She had just left the place she called home for the last 3 years, intact for the last time. "To your dad's now?" Jess asked as she started the engine. "Yes. And then I have to call Leo. I need to make sure the heavy equipment enters this neighborhood at 5 a.m. sharp before the residents are awake enough to react." Alara replied, her voice no longer trembling. Jess looked at her friend with a mix of fear and admiration. "You're really going to do it, Alara. You're going to tear it all down. Tomorrow morning, Jess, Ethan will be returning with his new queen. I just want to save them the trouble of opening the door. Because there won't be one. There won't be any walls. There will only be my mother's sacred land cleansed of a traitor." Alara's eyes burned in the darkness of the truck. But as the truck began to leave the subdivision, Alara saw a black luxury sedan pass them. She recognized the license plate. It was the car of Ethan's new business partner, the one that often gave Brenda a ride. Alara immediately ducked her head, her heart nearly leaping out of her chest. The car slowed down in front of her house as if monitoring whether the light was on. A new pressure seized her. If Ethan's side had started patrols or surveillance tonight, the Dawn demolition plan could be ruined. Alara realized she was playing with fire and time. She made a small, risky decision. She asked Jess not to go straight to her father's house, but to take the back roads to make sure no one was tailing them. "Hurry," Jess Alara whispered. Before they realized the bird has already flown the coop, her hand clutched the deed in her bag. The first night in the magnificent Richmond family mansion was not as sweet as Ethan had imagined. The master suite was the size of the entire ground floor of his house in Maple Creek. The air was scented with expensive aromatherapy oils, but it felt thin in Ethan's lungs. He sat on the edge of the impossibly soft bed, wearing silk pajamas gifted by his new mother-in-law, but he felt like a prisoner in a golden cage. In front of a large mirror, Clara was removing her makeup. She was beautiful, but her every move exuded a domineering aura that Ethan hadn't noticed behind her flirtations during their brief courtship. "Darling, before we go to your house tomorrow, let's stop by the jewelry boutique first." Clara's voice was flat, more of a directive than a suggestion. "My mother said our wedding ring designs are too dated. I want something custom-made." "Oh, and your house." "That woman, what was her name? Alara?" "I don't want any of her cheap furniture still there. Everything needs to be replaced before I move in." Ethan swallowed hard. "Clara, the house is still pretty nice. The furniture is—" "I didn't ask for your opinion, darling," Clara cut him off without taking her eyes off the mirror. "My father put you in a vice president position at his company, so do me the courtesy of upholding my image. I don't want my friends visiting a house with a working-class taste. If you don't have the money to replace everything, use the credit card my dad gave you this afternoon. But remember, that means you have to work harder, not slack off." Ethan fell silent. Clara's words weren't just a lifestyle demand. They were a reminder that here he was, just a man bought with money. He thought of Alara. Alara never demanded custom jewelry. Instead, she was the one who always figured out how to stretch Ethan's remaining salary to cover a month's worth of groceries while still wondering how to pay the installment for the cement to build the backyard extension. In this house, Ethan realized he had just traded genuine love for a position where he had to obey the commands of his wife and father-in-law all day. Feeling uneasy, Ethan left the room. He needed fresh air. But in the hallway, he ran into his father-in-law, Mr. Richmond, a cold-eyed real estate magnate who had looked at Ethan like a risky investment from the start. "Not asleep yet, son?" Mr. Richmond asked, puffing on a cigar. His sharp eyes scanned Ethan up and down. "You start at the office tomorrow. Don't be late. I hate undisciplined people, especially ones I've pulled up from the bottom. Don't let Clara complain about your performance either at the company or at home." "Yes, sir," Ethan replied curtly, his head bowed. Humiliation burned inside him. Ethan avoided Mr. Richmond's gaze and headed to a back balcony. Under the dim garden lights, he fumbled in his pajama pocket and pulled out his phone. On impulse, he opened a photo gallery he had moved to a hidden folder. It was a picture of Alara smiling, holding their baby. For a moment, a strange longing hit his chest. He remembered how Alara always had a warm cup of coffee ready for him whenever he came home from working late. He remembered her warm hugs in their small house, a place he used to think was cramped but now felt like the only place he was truly a king. Here in Clara's palace, he was just a servant in silk clothes. His phone vibrated. It was a call from his mother, Brenda. "Hello, Mom," Ethan whispered. "Ethan, how is it? Is it nice there? Did Clara get mad about the catering costs?" Brenda's voice was full of excitement, a stark contrast to Ethan's mood. "Clara is very demanding, Mom. And I don't think her father respects me. I keep thinking about Alara and the baby. What if we cancel moving into the Maple Creek house tomorrow? I feel guilty, Mom. I forgot to pay the electric bill before I left, so their power is out." "Don't be ridiculous," Brenda's voice turned sharp. "Don't be a coward. You've come this far. The Richmond family fortune can support us for 7 generations. Alara is just a stumbling block, Ethan. She has nothing. That house needs to be completely yours, so Clara feels comfortable. If you go back to Alara, do you want to live a hard life again, chased by installment payments? But the land belongs to Alara's family, Mom." "Who's going to know? That deed is probably just some nonsense her carpenter father made up. What's important is that you built the building. Anyway, we're going there tomorrow afternoon. I had Chloe check on the place. The lights are on, which means Alara is still there, waiting like a fool. We just need to go in, give her some cash to go back to her father's house, and it's over. Don't be weak, Ethan. Think about our future." The call ended. Ethan leaned his forehead against the cold balcony pillar. Shadows of regret began to cloud his logic. He realized he had traded a jewel for a crown of thorns. He missed Alara's smile, But the greed his mother had instilled in him and the fear of losing his new status trapped him in his decision. He returned to the room with a heavy heart and saw Clara already asleep. Her face looked arrogant even in her sleep. Ethan opened his messaging app. His fingers hovered over Alara's name. He wanted to apologize. He wanted to explain that all of this was because of family debt. But pride and shame held his fingers back. Finally, Ethan made a small, dangerous decision. He sent a short message to his sister Chloe. Go to the Maple Creek house early tomorrow morning. Make sure Alara isn't there. If she still is, call Mr. Richmond's people to quietly remove her before Clara and I arrive. I don't want Clara to see any drama. Ethan turned off his phone. A new pressure squeezed his chest. He knew his actions would completely destroy Alara, but he felt he had no other choice if he wanted to survive in the Richmond family palace. He was unaware that while he was planning her forced eviction, Alara was no longer in the house, and a threat far greater than a simple disturbance was moving towards the building he was so proud of. That morning, the sky over the magnificent Richmond family estate was overcast, as if the clouds carried the same heavy burden Alara felt. In a newly opened courier office, Alara stood straight before the counter. Her hands no longer trembled. Under the flickering fluorescent lights, she handed over a thick yellow envelope containing a notice of land eviction and building demolition. This wasn't just a threat. It was a legal procedure Leo had advised her to follow to leave a paper trail, giving Ethan one last chance. Please make sure this arrives at this address before 10 a.m., Sir Alara told the courier staff. Her voice sounded foreign even to her own ears, cold, dry, and merciless. It's extremely urgent. After paying for express delivery, Alara left the office and breathed in the humid morning air. Her mind was now at a strange crossroads. A part of her hoped Ethan would call after reading the letter, apologize, or at least show a sliver of humanity by acknowledging that the land truly belonged to her family. But the other part of her, the part that had been shattered in front of the Grand Astoria ballroom, no longer cared. At 9:30 a.m., a courier motorcycle stopped in front of the high gates of Clara's house. Chloe, who was just leaving to buy a fancy breakfast nearby, intercepted the rider, her face scrunched in a frown. Ethan's order from last night to clean out Alara from the Maple Creek house still weighed on her. This is for Mr. Ethan Davis, the rider said. Chloe snatched the envelope rudely. I'm his sister. Give it to me. I'll give it to him. As the rider left, Chloe stared at the yellow envelope with disgust. She saw the sender's name, Alara Miller. Without opening it, Chloe guessed its contents. To her, it was surely a threatening letter filled with curses or a tedious demand for property division. Crazy woman still chasing after my brother with this garbage, Chloe muttered. She walked over to a large trash can at the corner of the gate. Without a moment's hesitation, without even seeing the copy of the deed inside, Chloe tore the envelope in two and threw it into the pile of household waste. She didn't want to spoil Ethan's already foul mood. It might affect the allowance she received from her rich new sister-in-law. To Chloe, Alara's problem was a minor issue that would be over once she was physically removed tomorrow afternoon. Meanwhile, in a small coffee shop not far from the Maple Creek subdivision, Alara sat staring at her phone screen. She was tracking the delivery status through an app. 10:15 a.m. Delivered to recipient Chloe. Alara slowly placed her phone on the table. She waited for 10 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour. Her phone remained silent. No incoming calls, no reply messages, no signs of panic from Ethan's side. In Alara's mind, Ethan's silence was an absolute declaration of war. She took this dismissal as a sign that Ethan was standing his ground, that he felt he had everything, and was belittling her threat. How arrogant, Ethan, Alara thought to herself. Even my final warning doesn't deserve a reply from you. You feel so powerful behind the walls of the Richmond estate that you think you can ignore the law of the very land you're stepping on. The last shred of disappointment in Alara's heart died, completely replaced by a resolve as hard as frozen steel. She didn't know that the letter had never even reached Ethan's hands. But in this battle of pride, ignorance became the catalyst for a greater disaster. Alara left her cold coffee and stood up. She called Leo. Leo, it's time. They received the letter an hour ago, and there's no response. He's testing me, Alara said, her voice now as steady as the ticking of a clock. Are you sure, Alara? This is a big deal. The moment the heavy equipment comes off the truck, the residents will start gathering. Leo's voice sounded heavy on the other end. Do it, Leo. Now. I'm already near the site. I want everything finished before sunset. Alara walked towards her house. In the distance, she could see a large truck carrying an excavator turning into the main gate of the Maple Creek subdivision. The loud roar of its diesel engine shattered the usual quiet of the neighborhood. A few neighbors came out of their houses, staring at the intimidating heavy machinery with curious eyes. Alara stood on the sidewalk in front of her own house. She looked at the home she had called heaven for the past 3 years. She saw the window of the baby's room. She saw the door she used to open with a smile every time Ethan came home. Suddenly, a wave of extreme hesitation washed over her. This was the house where her son was born. This was as far as she knew the fruit of Ethan's hard-earned sweat. Even though he had ultimately betrayed her, demolishing this house meant destroying the physical evidence of her own life's history. But just as her hesitation peaked, a message arrived on her phone. It wasn't from Ethan, but from an unknown number. Alara Miller, this is Clara. Stop sending garbage letters to my parents. Ethan told me all about how greedy you are. We're coming there this afternoon and I don't want to see any of your cheap things still in the house. Get a grip. You've already lost. Alara squeezed her eyes shut. Clara's message was like pouring gasoline on the fire in her heart. Ethan had slandered her in front of his new wife. He had twisted the story to make her out to be the greedy one. Alara turned her head towards the excavator operator who was waiting for her instruction. With a decisive wave of her hand, Alara pointed to the main pillar of the house. Begin. Alara's command was short. The steel teeth of the excavator lifted, glinting under the darkening clouds. As the sound of the first impact against the living room wall echoed, a new pressure washed over Alara, the sound of cracking concrete like the snapping of bones. She had just made the most dangerous decision of her life, destroying her husband's property without a court order. It was an act that could make her lose custody of her child if Ethan painted her as an unstable mother. But as the first cloud of dust began to rise, Alara just stared straight ahead. She would not run. She would wait right there on those ruins, until Ethan came this afternoon to see his palace of lies reduced to rubble. Cement dust billowed high, mixing with the humid air and making it hard to breathe. Alara stood just a few meters away where the excavator's steel arm barely missed her. Her feet were planted firmly on the asphalt, which began to vibrate. Every thud of steel against the living room wall sounded like a clap of thunder shattering the peace of the Maple Creek subdivision. In her mind, the sound of cracking concrete was a symphony of liberation, though her heart still felt like it was being squeezed by an invisible hand. Residents began to gather. Women who were shopping at the mobile vegetable stand stopped in their tracks, mouths agape. Men, who were warming up their cars, emerged from their garages with puzzled faces. They knew Alara as the quiet wife, the one who always kept her head down when she walked. Seeing her there, commanding the destruction of her own home, was a scene beyond comprehension. Alara, wait, Leo approached her, his voice competing with the noise of the machinery. He looked anxious, his eyes constantly glancing towards the entrance of the subdivision. That black car, I think it's them. Alara turned her head. A convoy of 3 luxury cars was entering Rose Lane, the street where her house stood. At the front was a white luxury sedan adorned with flower ribbons, the newlyweds' car. The driver came to a sudden halt, seeing the massive piece of machinery tearing into the roof of the very place where a celebration was supposed to happen this afternoon. Ethan scrambled out of the car, his face crimson with rage. Behind him, Clara emerged in an elegant party dress, but her face was now pale with shock at the sight before her. From the second car, Brenda got out screaming hysterically as if she were the one being beaten. Alara, what are you doing? Ethan charged forward, but was stopped by Leo and 2 other crew members. Stop, that's my house. I built it with every single penny I earned. Are you insane, Alara? Alara didn't flinch. She reached into her bag and pulled out the now worn brown envelope. In a slow, deliberate motion, she held up the stamped green document. Your house, Ethan. Alara's voice rang out clear and powerful, cutting through the chaos. You may have paid for the cement. You may have paid the workers' salaries. But this land belongs to my mother. And I, as the sole owner of this land, never gave you permission to build your palace of adultery on my family's sacred ground. Brenda rushed forward, trying to grab Alara's hair, but several neighborhood women who had always been sympathetic to Alara blocked the old woman. You wicked thing. That's my son's money. Hundreds of thousands of dollars are buried there, Brenda shrieked. Your son's money should have been spent on his own son's formula, Brenda Alara shot back sharply. She then turned to Ethan, who stood stunned, staring in disbelief at the deed in Alara's hand. Clara Alara shifted her gaze to Ethan's new wife, who stood trembling beside the white sedan. This is your husband. Welcome to your new home. Unfortunately, I didn't prepare a door for you to enter. Alara turned to the excavator operator. Her red-rimmed eyes were no longer filled with tears of sadness. They were the eyes of a fury frozen by resolve. Tear down the backyard extension. Flatten all of it, she commanded. Crash. The steel arm swung with full force, demolishing the newly painted extension, the space that was supposed to be Clara's master bedroom. Brenda's screams and Ethan's curses were drowned out by the deafening roar of the collapsing building. Amid the chaos, Alara felt a terrible turmoil inside. She saw Ethan's broken face shattered, not because of lost love, but because of his pride, as a successful man now crumbled in front of his new wife and all their neighbors. A dark satisfaction flickered within Alara, but it was followed by a wave of immense fear. She knew Ethan wouldn't let this go. With Clara's family's financial backing, he would drag her into the most exhausting legal battle. Clara began shouting at Ethan, likely starting to realize his legal claim to the land was weak. "You said this was your house, Ethan. You said you were a successful businessman. Turns out you were just mooching off your wife's land. Shame on you." A fierce argument erupted between the newlyweds in the middle of the street, becoming a spectacle for the residents. Ethan tried to calm Clara down, but his hands were roughly slapped away. Brenda collapsed onto the asphalt either from a genuine medical emergency or a performance to gain sympathy. Alara turned away. The drama of the family she once revered now made her sick. She looked at the scattered rubble of her former home. The memories of the nights she waited for Ethan to return, the memory of bringing her baby home for the first time, all were now buried under chunks of concrete. "Stop," Leo Alara whispered to him. "Let's leave part of the front wall standing as a warning. The police will be here soon." Someone definitely called them Leo, warned hearing the faint sound of sirens in the distance. Alara took a long, deep breath. She knew she had won the moral and mental battle, but legally the storm was just beginning. She had destroyed her husband's asset worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. As police cars began to enter the subdivision, Ethan pointed a trembling finger at Alara. "You're going to rot in jail for this, Alara, and I'll take custody of our child because you're insane." Ethan's threat of a custody battle made Alara's heart sink. It was the only weakness she had left. In a wave of rising panic, Alara made a small, very dangerous decision. She wouldn't be arrested there meekly. "Leo, get me out of here through the back roads now," Alara whispered. As the police officers began to get out of their cars, Alara slipped through the crowd of residents. She had the deed, but she realized that from this moment on she was a fugitive. She had just demolished her house, and now she might have just demolished the bridge to her son's future as well. The airborne cement dust began to settle, covering the asphalt surface with a thin layer of gray. The excavator fell silent, and in its place was a quiet, more chilling than the earlier sounds of crashing concrete. In the middle of the still warm rubble, Alara stood. She hadn't run through the back roads as she'd planned. A strange force held her feet to the ground. She realized that fleeing would only justify the accusations of wrongdoing. She wanted to witness the destruction firsthand, the fall of the pride of a man who had destroyed her life. Ethan stumbled through the crowd of onlookers. His expensive tuxedo was now stained with dust. He stopped right in front of a pile of concrete that used to be the spot where he sat and commanded Alara. His mouth hung open, his eyes wide as he stared at the rebar jutting out from the ruins. "My house." Ethan's voice was a ragged groan like a wounded animal. "You're a demon, Alara. This was all my hard work. Every single penny I saved from working overtime, every loan I took out in my name. You flattened it in an instant." Ethan turned and lunged, but Leo quickly stepped in front of Alara, becoming a human shield. The watching residents began to murmur. Several were recording the scene on their phones. "Stop it, Ethan," a sharp voice halted his movement. Clara Richmond stepped forward. Her beautiful dress was a stark contrast to the dirty rubble behind her. Her usually arrogant face was now filled with a different kind of fury, the fury of someone who feels utterly deceived. Behind her, Brenda, who had apparently fainted earlier, stood supported by Chloe, her face pale as she looked at the pile of scrap that was supposed to be her future investment. "So this is the house you were so proud of," Clara pointed a trembling finger at the ruins. "This is the luxurious home you said you owned. Turns out your wife had to demolish it herself, because you have no rights to this land." "Clara, listen, this is just a misunderstanding. Alara is crazy." "I am not crazy, Clara," Alara cut in with deadly calm. She stepped out from behind Leo and walked until she was only a few feet away from Ethan and Clara. She no longer held any fear. She was armed with the sharp truth. Alara reached into her bag. She pulled out 2 envelopes. One was the brown envelope with the deed. The other was a new, crisp white envelope. "Ethan, you said you worked hard for this house." Alara looked at her husband with eyes devoid of any lingering affection. You worked hard to build walls, but you forgot to build honesty. You left me and your son to starve without electricity while you paid the deposit for Clara's luxurious catering with our remaining savings. Is that what you call the fruit of your labor? Alara threw the white envelope at Ethan's chest. It fell to the ground and opened, revealing a draft of a divorce petition and attached photos she had obtained from his old tablet photos of Ethan and Clara's affair, taken while Alara was still recovering from childbirth. That's the divorce petition I filed online this morning. And inside is the proof of all your betrayals. Alara's voice rose, commanding the atmosphere. Clara, do you want to know who you married? He's a man who let his own child suffer with a fever without medicine for 2 weeks so he could marry another woman. He's a man who built a palace on land he doesn't own and lied to you that he was a successful businessman. Clara picked up the photos. Her eyes widened as she saw the dates on them. It was during the period when Ethan had confessed to her that he was a divorced man whose assets were tied up in the bank. Ethan, you told me you were divorced a year ago, Clara shrieked, her voice cracking. She looked at Ethan with unbearable disgust. You lied to me. You lied to my father. Clara, it's not like that. I did it for us. Ethan tried to take Clara's hand, but she slapped him across the face with a deafening crack. Don't touch me. You're nothing but a parasite. Clara turned and ran back to her white car, tears beginning to ruin her makeup. She left Ethan standing in the middle of the ruins, as if he were a piece of filth to be immediately cleaned out of her glamorous life. Brenda shrieked and lunged at Alara with her nails out. Are you satisfied now, huh? You've ruined my son's future. You ruined everything. Alara looked at her mother-in-law coldly. You ruined it. From the moment you supported Ethan's betrayal, you thought you could throw me and your own grandson away like trash. Now, take these remaining pieces of wall. Take them to your house. Because from today, not a single inch of this land can be stepped on by any of you. Ethan collapsed onto a pile of concrete. His sky-high pride had just crumbled more devastatingly than the building behind him. He had lost his house, his new wife, and the position his father-in-law had promised. And now he realized he had lost the only woman who had ever loved him unconditionally. But this confrontation wasn't over. Ethan raised his head, his eyes red with hatred. You think you won, Alara. You demolished this building without a court order. I'm calling the police right now. I'll make sure you go to jail and never see that child again. He's my son, and I'll take him away from a crazy mother like you. Alara's heart dropped. Ethan's threat about custody was the one blade that could still wound her. She saw the 2 police officers who had arrived earlier approaching them holding notepads and with handcuffs on their belts. Alara clutched her bag. She knew she had won the battle of pride. But the tedious legal war was just beginning. Inside her bag, she felt her phone vibrate. It was a message from her father, Frank. Alara, take the child and go somewhere safe right now. Leo will help you. Don't let them take my grandson. Alara looked at Ethan, who was now talking to the police, pointing at her as the perpetrator. A new pressure crushed her. She had flattened her home, and now she had to be prepared to lose her freedom or even her child if she didn't act immediately. In a split-second dangerous decision, Alara signaled to Leo. Take me to the car, Leo. We have to go before they stop us, she whispered. Under a light drizzle that began to wet the dust of destruction, Alara walked away, leaving the rubble of her life behind. She had won, but she was now a fugitive on the run from the wrath of a man who had nothing left to stake but his revenge. The overnight rain left a thick, earthy smell in the morning air of the Maple Creek subdivision. Alara stood at the edge of Rose Lane, gazing at the now flattened patch of land, nothing but packed red dirt. There were no more crooked walls, no protruding concrete debris. Leo had completed his task perfectly. He had wiped away every trace of Ethan's palace down to the last brick. In her arms, the baby shifted gently, breathing in the fresh morning air, no longer choked with construction dust. Alara stroked her son's cheek, feeling a sense of peace that had been absent from her heart for months. The roar of fury that had exploded yesterday had now subsided into a quiet calm. She no longer felt like a fugitive, as the lawyer her father had sent confirmed that her actions, demolishing a building on her own land after sending an official warning, were within the bounds of powerful land dispute laws. But Alara's tranquility was briefly shattered when a taxi pulled up a short distance away. A haggard-looking Ethan got out. The tuxedo he had worn with such pride yesterday was now filthy, his hair disheveled. His face was puffy, bearing the marks of an unbearable internal destruction. Behind him, a frail-looking Brenda followed. The woman who usually adorned herself with flashy jewelry was now in old pajamas with only a thin jacket. Her face was pale, her eyes vacant, and she stumbled, clinging to Ethan's arm. The events of yesterday had caused her blood pressure to spike, making her look 10 years older overnight. Are you satisfied now, Alara? Ethan's voice was hoarse. There was no threat in it like yesterday, only despair. Clara kicked me out last night. Her father revoked my position at the company and canceled every contract in my name. I have nothing now. The house is gone, my savings are depleted from that party, and now my mother is sick. Alara looked at her ex-husband without hatred, but also without pity. I didn't destroy you, Ethan. You destroyed yourself when you decided to build a life on lies. You chose to abandon us, so don't blame me for abandoning the house you built on my mother's rights. Brenda tried to speak, her voice trembling. Alara, please, don't you feel sorry for Ethan? At least help us get a small apartment to rent or give us some money from selling the building materials. I'm sick, child. I'm no longer your daughter-in-law whom you can command with guilt, Alara replied calmly but firmly. Where is Chloe? Isn't she the one who should be taking care of you? She was the most excited person to pack up the valuables from this house yesterday. Ethan hung his head. Chloe went to a friend's house. She said she doesn't want to suffer. She said she's embarrassed to have a swindler for a brother. A bitter smile touched Alara's lips. This was the culmination of it all. Ethan, who had worshipped wealth and status, was now abandoned by the very people he had pampered with, the money he gained by oppressing Alara. His new wife had cast him out as a burden. His sister had left him when he was no longer useful. And his mother now served as a permanent reminder of the failure of the misguided values she herself had instilled. Ethan looked at the empty lot with vacant eyes. I'm going to sue for custody, Alara. I'm still that baby's father. Go ahead, Ethan. Alara met his gaze without fear. Tell the judge that you let your own child starve without electricity for 2 weeks so you could marry another woman. Tell him you have no house and no job to support him. If you think that will help you win, by all means do it. Ethan was speechless. He knew he was utterly defeated. He was a fraud in the eyes of the Richmond family, a drifter. And now he was no better than a homeless man in front of the woman he once considered weak. An hour later, Leo arrived with a neatly dressed, middle-aged man. He introduced himself as Mr. Peterson, a local real estate developer. Mr. Peterson had long been eyeing this plot of land to build a commercial building due to its strategic location. The paperwork for this land is very clean, Mr. Peterson, Leo said, handing him Alara's green envelope. The owner wishes for this transaction to be concluded as quickly as possible. Alara watched as Mr. Peterson surveyed the boundaries of the land. In her mind, a whisper questioned whether it was right to sell her mother's inheritance. This land was the only physical connection she had to her late mother, but she knew that keeping it would only keep her tied to the bad memories of Ethan. Every clod of this earth was tainted with betrayal. I agree to the price you've offered, Miss Miller, Mr. Peterson said, shaking Alara's hand. It's a prime location. We'll prepare the documents this afternoon. Alara nodded firmly. The decision was made. She would sell this land. With the proceeds, she would buy a small house near her father's, save for her son's education, and maybe start a small catering business with Jess. She didn't need a palace built on lies. She just needed a home built on honesty. While Mr. Peterson and Leo began their technical discussions, Alara walked to the center of the empty lot. She crouched down and touched the damp red earth. Mom, I'm sorry for selling this land, her heart spoke to her mother's memory. But I don't want to grow in a field of thorns. I want to take your grandson to a place where he can be proud of his mother. She took a handful of soil, put it in a small jar to keep as a memento, and stood up straight. She saw Ethan and Brenda still sitting on the curb, waiting for a taxi that might never come, heading towards an uncertain future. They looked like fading shadows of the past. Alara walked to Leo's car where Jess was already waiting, waving cheerfully. Is it over, Alara? Jess asked softly. Yes, Jess. It's all flattened. There's nothing left, Alara replied. Alara got into the car. As the engine started and the car began to leave the Maple Creek subdivision, she didn't look back. She looked straight ahead towards the wide-open road. In her arms, the baby let out a small laugh as if he understood that the burden that had been crushing his mother's life was finally gone. The main conflict with Ethan was over. She no longer wanted revenge. His ruined life was punishment enough. But Alara's mind was now filled with a new challenge, becoming an independent single mother. She had to learn to stand on her own 2 feet without anyone's protection. Her last small decision that day was to turn off her old phone and throw the SIM card out the car window. She no longer wanted the voices of the past to disturb her. She chose to disappear for a while to build a new life in a place unknown to Ethan or Brenda. The financial risks and the challenges of raising a child alone now lay before her. But for the first time in a very long time, Alara felt truly free. On the empty land she left behind, only silence remained. And in her heart, a new clean page was opened, ready to be filled with the story of a woman's strength, rising from the rubble of betrayal. There is one valuable lesson we can learn together. Never be afraid to tear down a magnificent palace if its foundation is built on lies. Because it is better to stand on empty ground with your pride than to live in a luxurious building while being mentally imprisoned. True strength is not about how much we can endure in pain, but about the courage to say enough and reclaim our rights. May Alara's story remind us that no storm, no matter how fierce, can sink those whose roots are planted in strong self-worth. Thank you for faithfully following this drama to its final chapter. Be brave people who stand firm on the truth. See you again in our next passionate work.